Hello, my name's Bev and I'm the author of the book Please Eat, A Mother's Struggle to Free Her Teenage Son from Anorexia, which describes our family's battle with the deadly eating disorder, anorexia nervosa, which my teenage son Ben developed back in 2009 when he was just 15 years old. This post is from the 10th of October 2011 and it's called "It's 12 months since Ben turned a corner." 12 months ago, Ben was sitting in front of our CAMS team. For the first time since he'd started treatment 8 months before, they came down like a ton of bricks and insisted Ben increase his weight, starting immediately. The reason for this? Well, the previous day, Ben had collapsed at school and been rushed to hospital again with a dangerously low pulse rate, the second time this had happened in 8 months. Not only this, but he completely freaked out in the hospital. The eating disorder rage at its worst and most violent, kicking stuff around, swearing, shouting, fighting, and trying to discharge himself by running out of the hospital. In fact, it was so bad that he'd had to be physically restrained by medical staff, security, and eventually, outside the hospital in full view of a gawping public, the police. The eating disorder rage had a side effect in that it brought his pulse rate back to an acceptable level. The medical staff ideally wanted to admit him again for observation, but now that his pulse rate was back up, he was eventually discharged, but on the condition that he regularly undergo ECG and blood tests at our GP surgery. The following day, CAMS took all of this very seriously. The atmosphere was completely different, with direct, straight talking along the lines of, "We insist you do such and such, or there is a real chance you could end up in hospital." They explained to him why, with his pulse rate so low, they might not need to wait until his BMI was sufficiently low enough to warrant admission to the eating disorder unit. They could act sooner if they needed to. I remember the word sectioning being used. Ben had been losing weight consistently since the beginning of May, 5 months of steady weight loss. Up to this latest heart scare, the advice had simply been to experiment to see what worked and what didn't, until he learned how to, quote, make the right choices, unquote, which would hopefully and eventually turn things around. But all 5 months of experimenting had achieved was consistent weight loss. By the beginning of October 2010, Ben's weight was lower than it had ever been, even lower than when I had first taken him to the GP 13 months before. Low heart rates are seen quite frequently in people suffering from anorexia because of the damage that starvation causes to the heart muscle. CAMS explained to Ben their concern that his body was literally beginning to eat itself, and this could result in long-term, if not permanent damage, or worse. Although I was worried sick about these implications, I was also delighted that CAMS were finally taking things seriously enough to say, enough is enough. And it must have hit a nerve with Ben, especially as he hated hospitals with a vengeance by now. Additionally, he'd always told me that he could control his weight so it never got low enough to warrant admission to the eating disorder unit. Now CAMS were implying that they could admit him right now if they felt he was in danger. Ben, or rather the anorexia that had taken Ben over, hadn't banked on that. From that moment onwards, Ben turned a corner, quite dramatically and visibly in fact. 12 months on, although we've had our ups and downs, he is still heading in the right direction. And touch wood, his pulse rate continues to be healthy. Also, despite not always seeing eye to eye with them, Cams and I got along a heck of a lot better after that point. Not only did I feel they were taking Ben's condition seriously, they were taking my concerns seriously as well. So that's what we were doing 12 months ago. Was it a blessing in disguise, I wonder? And that's the end of that post. Thank you for listening. You'll find a link below to my blog, and you'll also find a link to my website where you can download free PDFs of my blog, and also a link to Amazon where you can buy a copy of my book.